Parole has been denied for Brandon Fernandez. He's one of the two men convicted in the murder of a Placer County teen in 2003.
It gets easier, but it never goes away. It's like some people go, it's been 14 years that long, but it still seems like yesterday.
What begins as a teenage romance ends in unthinkable tragedy. This is the heartbreaking story of Justine Vanderschoot, a 17-year-old girl with a bright future ahead of her. She was intelligent, kind, and full of promise, beloved by her family, friends, and everyone who had the chance to know her. But beneath the surface of her seemingly ordinary teenage life, a storm was brewing, a darkness she could never have foreseen. A relationship that started with youthful innocence turned controlling, then dangerous, and finally, fatal. How could someone so full of life fall victim to such a horrific crime? And why did those closest to her, the ones she trusted, turn into the architects of her nightmare? This is a tale of betrayal, jealousy, and the devastating consequences of ignoring warning signs. Let's uncover what really happened to Justine Vanderschoot. Who was Justine Vanderschoot? She was a bright and ambitious 17-year-old high school student from Placer County, California. Known for her intelligence and warm heart, Justine had a magnetic personality that drew people to her. She excelled in school, cherished her family, and had a close-knit group of friends who adored her vibrant spirit. Justine's life was full of promise, and her future seemed as bright as her ever-present smile. At home, Justine was the daughter every parent dreams of, thoughtful, responsible, and deeply caring. Her family described her as a light in their lives, someone who brought joy to every moment. Whether it was her schoolwork, her part-time job, or simply spending time with loved ones, she poured her heart into everything she did. Then there was Daniel Bessemer, her boyfriend. To outsiders, their relationship seemed like a typical teenage romance. Daniel, a year older, was often seen at Justine's home, sharing meals with her family and spending time with her after school. At first, it seemed innocent and loving, the kind of young relationship that blossoms in high school hallways. But beneath the surface, there were signs of something troubling. Daniel began to show an unhealthy need for control. He wanted to know where Justine was at all times, who she was talking to, and what she was doing. His jealousy crept into their relationship, subtle at first but growing stronger with time. Justine's friends noticed the changes too, how Daniel's possessiveness seemed to cast a shadow over her once bright demeanor. What started as a normal teenage relationship had begun to unravel into something darker. It was a typical late summer evening in Auburn, California. Justine Vanderschoot, then 17, spent the night at home with her family, sharing a meal and laughter. Her boyfriend, Daniel Bessemer, joined them for dinner, as he often did. To everyone in the Vanderschoot household, it seemed like an ordinary evening. Justine, full of life and energy, had no idea that danger was lurking so close. Later that night, Justine left with Daniel and his roommate, Brandon Fernandez, under the pretense of a casual outing. There was no reason to suspect anything was amiss. Justine trusted Daniel, and her family saw no red flags. The evening progressed without incident, or so it seemed, but hours later, Justine would not come home. By the next morning, panic began to set in. Justine's parents, Lynette and Don Vanderschoot, quickly realized that something was wrong. Her bed hadn't been slept in, and her truck was nowhere to be seen. Calls to Justine's phone went unanswered, and her family's concern turned into fear. Their fears escalated when Justine's truck was found abandoned in a park-and-ride lot just a few miles from their home. The vehicle was locked, with no signs of a struggle or a clue as to where she might have gone. Her purse, driver's license, and gas card were still at home. She hadn't packed for a trip, and there was no indication that she intended to run away. For the Vanderschoot family, the lack of answers was unbearable. They knew Justine wouldn't simply vanish without a word. Word of Justine's disappearance spread quickly through the close-knit Auburn community. Within days, friends, neighbors, and even strangers joined forces to search for the missing teenager. Volunteers combed the area, distributing flyers with her picture and information. Search parties scoured local trails, parks, and back roads, hoping to find any sign of her. A vigil was held at the park and ride lot where her truck was found, drawing a crowd of people who came to show their support and offer prayers for Justine's safe return. The scene was emotional. Candles flickered in the cool evening air as tearful friends and family shared stories of Justine's kindness and light. As the hours turned into days, the Placer County Sheriff's Department grew increasingly concerned. Justine's sudden disappearance didn't fit the profile of a runaway teenager. Investigators focused on her last known whereabouts and those who had been with her that evening. Their attention soon turned to Daniel Bessemer and Brandon Fernandez, the last two people to see Justine alive. The peaceful community of Auburn was gripped with fear and uncertainty, wondering how and why such a tragedy could strike one of their own. All they could do was wait, hope, and pray that answers would soon come. The initial hours of the investigation were a whirlwind of activity. Justine's family and friends provided crucial details about her last known movements. Her boyfriend, Daniel Bessemer, quickly became a person of interest. Daniel, calm and composed, willingly sat down with investigators. He recounted the events of that night, claiming that he had dropped Justine off at home after their outing. His demeanor seemed cooperative, but something about his story felt rehearsed. Brandon Fernandez, Daniel's roommate, was also questioned. He confirmed Daniel's version of events, stating that the two of them had spent the rest of the evening at their apartment. At first glance, their alibi seemed airtight. However, as police delved deeper, cracks began to form in their accounts. A turning point came when detectives spoke with mutual friends of Daniel and Brandon. These friends revealed something troubling. The duo hadn't been at their apartment all night, as they claimed. Investigators pressed further, uncovering that Daniel and Brandon's alibi was fabricated. One piece of evidence stood out, a recorded phone call between Brandon and a friend named Clayton. In the recording, Brandon was heard warning Clayton, "Stick to the plan, don't talk to the police." It was a red flag investigators couldn't ignore. The question remained, what were they hiding and why? As detectives retraced Justine's final hours, they discovered alarming details. Brandon, known for his technical skills, had used spyware to monitor Justine's phone. He had recorded her conversations, including calls with a Navy sailor she had met during a spring break trip. Fueled by jealousy, Daniel became convinced that Justine had been unfaithful and decided she needed to be punished. With mounting evidence, police brought Brandon in for further questioning. At first, he stuck to his story, but the recorded phone call proved to be his undoing. Confronted with the evidence, his resolve began to crack. When an FBI profiler joined the interrogation, the pressure became too much for Brandon to bear. The profiler's calculated approach worked. Brandon finally admitted to his role in Justine's disappearance and murder. He revealed the horrifying truth. He and Daniel had lured Justine out under false pretenses. They drove her to a secluded area in the woods, where Daniel attacked her with a taser and then strangled her. As if the confession weren't horrifying enough, Brandon also disclosed the location of Justine's grave. He led investigators to a remote hillside in Applegate, California. What they found there was even more devastating than they had imagined. When Brandon Fernandez led investigators to the site where Justine Vanderschoot had been buried, the true horror of her final moments came to light. Hidden in a remote wooded area in Applegate, California, they discovered her grave. It was shallow, hastily covered, and littered with signs of an unthinkable crime. Alongside the disturbed earth, they found Justine's necklace, a haunting reminder of the vibrant life so cruelly taken. The autopsy report later revealed a chilling detail. Justine had dirt in her lungs and esophagus. She had been alive when buried, gasping for air in the dark earth. This finding shattered everyone involved in the case, from her grieving family to the seasoned investigators. It painted a vivid picture of the brutality Justine endured, turning the case into a symbol of unimaginable cruelty. This was no crime of passion, it was a meticulously planned murder. Evidence from the investigation showed that Daniel Bessemer and Brandon Fernandez had prepared for weeks. They had chosen a remote location and dug Justine's grave in advance, leaving no room for doubt about their intentions. But perhaps the most disturbing detail was the mixtape. Before the murder, Daniel had created a cruel playlist interspersed with recordings of Justine's private phone calls. These were conversations she had with the Navy sailor she had met during a trip to Florida. Daniel had secretly recorded these calls using Brandon's tech expertise. The tape was meant to humiliate Justine, a twisted form of punishment for what Daniel perceived as betrayal. The sequence of events that unfolded that night was horrifying. After convincing Justine to meet them, Daniel and Brandon drove her to the pre-dug grave. Inside the car, they played the mixtape, forcing her to listen. When they reached the site, Daniel used a taser to incapacitate Justine before strangling her. Believing she was dead, they stripped her, doused her with a chemical to accelerate decomposition, and buried her. While Daniel was the primary aggressor, Brandon's role in the crime was more complex. He claimed to have stepped away during the actual murder, only to return and assist in burying Justine. However, his involvement in planning the crime painted a different picture. Brandon's technical skills had been instrumental in the lead-up to the murder. He had not only tapped Justine's phone, but also participated in the grave's preparation. His actions suggested complicity at the very least, though some questioned whether he had been manipulated by Daniel or if he acted out of fear. Some theories emerged regarding Brandon's involvement. Was he merely a subordinate following Daniel's orders, or was he an equal partner in this heinous act? His confession included statements indicating reluctance, but his decision to go along with the plan and his failure to stop Daniel pointed to a more active role. In court, both men tried to shift blame, with Daniel asserting that Brandon had been the instigator and Brandon claiming he was just an unwilling accomplice. These conflicting accounts highlighted the toxic dynamic between the two. Ultimately, the evidence showed that both had contributed significantly to Justine's death. As the investigation unfolded, the premeditated nature of the crime and the level of planning involved left an indelible mark on the community. It wasn't just the brutality of the act that shocked people, but also the cold, calculated way it was executed. The image of a vibrant, trusting teenager being betrayed and subjected to such cruelty by those she trusted continues to haunt all who hear her story. Justice for Justine Vanderschoot began to take shape in 2005 when Brandon Fernandez and Daniel Bessemer faced their sentences. Brandon, who confessed to his role and cooperated with authorities by leading them to Justine's grave, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 15 years to life, a punishment many felt was too lenient for his level of involvement in the crime. Daniel, on the other hand, received a harsher sentence of 25 years to life for first-degree murder. His role as the mastermind and direct perpetrator of Justine's death made the severity of his punishment fitting in the eyes of the court and the community. While the sentences provided a semblance of justice, they couldn't erase the pain endured by Justine's family. For them, the courtroom victories were bittersweet, a momentary relief in a saga of grief and loss. As the years passed, the Vanderschoot family was faced with an ongoing nightmare: parole hearings. Each time Brandon or Daniel became eligible for parole, it reopened the wounds inflicted by their horrific crime. For the Vanderschoots, these hearings weren't just legal proceedings. They were emotional trials, forcing them to relive the details of Justine's murder. Justine's mother, Lynette, described the hearings as torture, adding, "Every time we sit in that room, we have to fight to make sure they stay behind bars." The family, determined to protect the community and honor Justine's memory, spoke out passionately against the release of her killers. The community rallied behind them, signing petitions and attending hearings to show their support. In 2017, over 22,000 signatures were collected to oppose Brandon's parole. At each hearing, the Vanderschoots reminded the parole board of the calculated cruelty of the crime and the lasting impact on their family and the community. To this day, neither Daniel nor Brandon has been released. Both remain behind bars, their parole repeatedly denied. For the Vanderschoot family, the fight for justice is ongoing. Despite the legal outcomes, the emotional toll of their journey is immeasurable. Their courage and determination, however, serve as a powerful testament to their love for Justine and their commitment to ensuring her killers never walk free again. The heartbreaking story of Justine Vanderschoot serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships. Controlling behavior, jealousy, and isolation are often precursors to abuse, and understanding these patterns could save lives. Justine's tragedy inspired initiatives like teen dating violence education, aimed at teaching young people about healthy boundaries and the early signs of danger. Justine's vibrant spirit lives on in the hearts of her family, friends, and community. Through candlelight vigils, advocacy campaigns, and educational programs, her memory has become a beacon of hope and change. Her story has galvanized efforts to ensure justice for victims and to create a safer world for future generations. We can all play a part in preventing such tragedies. Support victims' families by signing petitions, raising awareness, and advocating for systemic changes that prioritize safety and justice. Let's honor Justine by working to build a world where no one else has to endure such loss. Together, we can ensure her legacy is one of hope and protection.